Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The time is 9 a.m. and today is Thursday, March 21st, 2019. This is day one of a two-day meeting for the Physical Therapy Board of California, and we're meeting in the Department of Consumer Affairs hearing room located at 2005 Evergreen Street in Sacramento. Can we please have roll call?
Alicia Rabene-Amen.
Here.
TJ Watkins.
Yeah.
Jesus Dominguez.
Present.
Daniel Drummer.
Present.
Katarina Ellaby.
Present.
Tanya McMillian.
Present.
All members are present and the board has a quorum.
Thank you. And we'll start the meeting today with the reading of the mission statement for the Physical Therapy Board of California by Ms. Tanya McMillian.
To advance and protect the interests of the people of California by the effective administration of the Physical Therapy Practice Act.
Thank you. And moving into agenda item number 5, which is review and approval of the December 5th and 6th, 2018 meeting minutes.
Okay, so the draft minutes are on page 9 of the meeting materials. I'll go ahead and go through each page. Were there any edits for page 1? Page 2?
Yes, I just have a question actually. In the middle of the page, after the paragraph under B, in italicized text, does that statement belong there? Is that usually in our minutes? Is it just something that we put in there for reference?
It's typical to have it there as a result of the two hearings that were that day. So for the reader to come through and see these were the two petitions, and then subsequent to those petitions, the board went into closed session to deliberate on those matters.
Okay, even though it says that in the paragraph above, for both paragraphs, evidence was received, the record was closed, and the matter was submitted for decision?
Right, and then after that submission of the matters, we entered into closed session.
Okay, because it says, after submission of the matters, the board will convene in closed session, as if it's going to happen. And I might just be nitpicking here. I'm just trying to get some understanding.
And it's a matter of clarity. If we think it confuses the matter, we can absolutely edit it. Farther down, you'll see the times that we went in and those kind of things. So I think it is a little unnecessary at that point.
Any other board members have any comment on that at all? I think if it benefits, the public with transparency in any way, I think it's okay to keep it in there. Okay. All right. Let's move
Well,
on.
because in the you're talking about line 51 and 52,
Yes.
correct? Okay. Because lines 55 and 56 repeat it, essentially.
Yes.
So and section 4 typically follows whenever we have
A petition.
petitions. I would just question whether or not the italicized statement on 51, 52 needs to be there, because 4 restates it right after the petitions are presented.
So we strike that.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other edits on page 2? Page 3?
I have one under number 6, line 83. The word occur. It's misspelled.
No, thank you. Any other edits on page 3? Page 4?
There's another in line 130. Remove the comma after Palo.
Okay, thank you. 5.
Number 167, remove the comma after he.
Any other edits on page 5? Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Page 15.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back to page 14? I believe on line 523, after question on the renewal form, I think that comma should be a semicolon. If I'm correct.
Okay. Any other edits on page 14 or 15? Page 16. Page 17. Page 18. Page 19. Page 20. Page 21. Page 22.
I have a edit on page 22, agenda item number 29, the dates for today's meeting.
Oh, thank you. Any other edits on page 22? Okay, so we're looking for a motion.
My compliments to whoever wrote the minutes.
Thank you.
I'd like to move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
First by President Rubina Amon and a second by Ms. Ellaby. And any further board discussion? Any public comment? And a roll call vote, please.
Alicia Rabin, amen.
Aye.
TJ Watkins.
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez.
Aye.
Daniel Drummer.
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby.
Aye.
Tanya McMillian.
Aye.
Motion carried, 6-0.
Thank you. And agenda item number 6, review and approval of the February 13th, 2019 teleconference meeting minutes.
Okay, those minutes begin on page 31 of the PDF. Were there any edits on page 1? I actually had one edit on line 15. In lieu of recessed, it should be adjourned, as it was a one-day meeting.
Oh, thank you.
Were there any additional edits that you had on page 1? Page 2?
I have a couple of recommendations. It's a unique agenda because it's teleconference, so we don't do them as often, minutes, but the board identified, which locations they were in because of a requirement that the board members be at each of the teleconference locations. So I'd recommend a note in there either identifying the locations for each board member or in the alternative including a sentence that indicates, a board member was present at each of the notice teleconference locations. And then the second thing was in the public comment section. It says the board requested public comment. I would just add a clarification that they requested public comment at each of the notice teleconference locations. And then my final comment is in the item 3, where it says closed session. It says the board went into closed session to deliberate on item 3, and then it adjourned. I would just add the clarification that the board returned to open session and then adjourned in open session.
And so for the board, so there's with the idea of showing that a member was present at each location, there's two different ideas in doing that. And one is where we list members via telephone, and we say, as an example, Dr. Dominguez present, and list the actual location. Or would you rather have a generic sentence that says something along the lines that a board member was present at each advertised location?
I prefer the second.
The more generic?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments from the board on that?
The second recommendation for board decision was to include a clarification for item 2 that public comment was taken for each location. The board requested public comment on the items not on the agenda at each of the notice locations, and there was no public comment.
I'm not against putting that, but I'm kind of thinking it's assumed. I mean, it's a public meeting at all those places, and we ask for public comment, but I don't think that the sentence excludes all the locations.
No, I don't think it does. I think the reason I'm recommending it is that there are two ways, I guess, you can ask for public comment during a teleconference. Someone at one location, let's say headquarters, can say, does anyone at any location have a public comment to make? But the board went to kind of great lengths to make sure that they asked at every single location, are there any public comments? And then reported back, I think, to headquarters to say, no public comments here, no public comments here, and did that for each location. And to the board's credit, that they went and made sure that every location had the opportunity to provide public comment. There was none at any of the locations, but I think this document is, as a document for public consumption, would help clarify for the public that the board did do that extra effort to do that. But I agree with you. I don't think that what happened is excluded by what's written here. It's just more not explicitly stated.
So can you give us an example again of how that would be worded in the sentence?
The board requested public comment on items not on the agenda at each noticed teleconference location, and there was no public comment.
I'm good with that. Does anyone else have any discussion or comment? Anyone opposed to that? Okay. Brooke, were you able to capture that? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And the third recommendation was to identify that the board adjourned in open session. And that's the last sentence in item 3.
And that's just a simple rephrasing, right? So the board went into closed session at 10:15 to deliberate on agenda item 13 and returned at 11:20 to adjourn.
And returned
Return to
into
open session. Okay. Any other edits or suggestions?
Okay. Anyone want to move?
I move. Adopt the color conference minutes
As amended.
as amended.
I'll second.
First by Mr. Watkins and a second by Dr. Dominguez. Any further board discussion? And any public comment? And a roll call vote, please.
Alicia Rabene-Amen,
Aye.
TJ Watkins,
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez,
Aye.
Daniel Drummer,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby,
Aye.
Tanya McMillian.
Aye.
6-0, motion carried.
Thank you. And let's move into agenda item number 7, President's Report. The 2019 adopted meeting calendar. And any comments from board members?
Do you want to just go ahead?
I can.
Because you're reading my mind.
Yeah, I can address that issue for you. We have a bit of a schedule conflict for the June meeting. And so we reached out to CSU Long Beach and asked if they would be willing to still facilitate the meeting, but instead of the 19th and 20th, it would now be the 20th and 21st. And in doing so, would allow 2 of our board members to attend a board member orientation training with the Department of Consumer Affairs on the 19th. That is it's scheduled in Southern California anyway. So as long as that schedule works for the rest of members, I'd ask for the members to consider that and amend the calendar accordingly.
So I didn't hear, but I want to confirm, has the school said that the 20th?
The school is amenable and can handle that request.
How nice of them.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm game.
I'll put the motion on the floor. Move to amend the meeting calendar for June 2019 so that the PTBC meeting will be June 20th and 21st.
I'll second it.
Yeah, since I have an interest in it, I would third it maybe.
So are we going to make a motion on each date that we may change, or do you want to do one big motion for the whole 2019 calendar?
It would be to adopt the 2019 calendar as amended, assuming that there aren't any other recommendations that I'm not aware of.
So let's keep the motion on the floor, but have further discussion on the other dates then.
Sure.
Okay. So just want to point out that the April student conclave meeting, I believe, is on Saturday the 20th. That doesn't change anything for us, but just a note.
We could certainly add it to this calendar.
I think it's on there for the 18th. So I think it's going to be Saturday the 20th.
Yeah.
I have some additions to the calendar as well. The regulatory training for board members and board staff for FSBPT will be held on August 16th through the 18th. Also, their annual meeting will be actually in October on the 24th and 26th.
24th, 25th, 26th.
Correct.
And Life?
Life, the dates are correct. It's July 13th and 14th.
Any further comment or discussion on the 2019 meeting calendar from board members? And any public comment? And we've got a motion on the floor by Dr. Drummer and a second by Dr. Dominguez. Oh, Sorry, second was by Mr. Watkins. Thank you. And can we have a roll call vote, please?
Alicia Benayemet,
Aye.
TJ Watkins,
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez,
Aye.
Daniel Drummer,
Aye.
Katerina Ellaby,
Aye.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
6-0, motion carried.
Thank you. And agenda item 7B, the 2020 proposed meeting calendar. Any board member comment? I just have an observation, and there's probably reason behind this. Our March meeting is in the fourth week, our June meeting is in the fourth week, our September meeting's in the third week, and the December meeting's in the second week, and I don't have a problem with that at all. Just noticing the different weeks that the meetings are in and wondering if there's reason for that.
Nothing other than trying to account for other things within those particular months, right? So the December is kind of trying to stay away from the holiday time. The dates that we selected for the late time of March kind of coincides with some graduation issues and some legislative session issues. So, but there's nothing in particular that dictates a first, second, or third week.
One of the things that I did notice with this meeting being scheduled in March and reviewing the legislative calendar is that many things are just being presented. They haven't been developed at all. And so it's going to be really difficult for me, and I think for the rest of the board members, to really have a good discussion about where we might stand on particular issues of that are being brought to the legislature. And then our next meeting, not until towards the end of June, most of the things are already to be out of committees, and so we're losing our opportunity to really comment or to be able to present our opinions to the legislator if that becomes an issue, or if there's things that are relevant for us.
That's a great observation.
At this point, it's an observation, and I'm not sure that I'm ready to present considering alternatives, but I wanted to hear what the rest of the board might think about it as well, and to see if we want to try to continue with our new schedule now. It wasn't something when we started talking about a modified schedule, moving from the February, May, August, November rotations to this one. It wasn't something that popped into my head at that point, and now seeing it this time, it's there.
The staff perspective is that was something that the legislative calendar was something that we took into account with the shifting back 1 month. And unfortunately, because of that quarterly meeting frequency, if we, as an example, switched from March back to February, the February meeting would be no legislative discussions whatsoever because nothing had been finalized or presented at that point. But there is room to, I think, look at June and maybe consider a week or two earlier in the month of June to address that deadline coming out of committee. So that's something we can look into.
I think for me, it's helpful to have an example, just any example at all of something that we might, an action that we might take in the second week of June that can have an effect in time.
Well, I have the example of what we did last June,
Okay.
when we were in Pomona at Western. The board at that point took a position of opposition against the athletic trainer bill, and we had the opportunity at that time to be able to do it. because the bill had not moved forward yet. My worry is that if we go more towards the end of June, that we may be closing our opportunity to be able to do that kind of thing with any legislative bills that may be facing.
Thank you. I would support moving the meeting 1 or 2 weeks earlier. Any other board discussion, comment?
I agree. I would hate to miss the opportunity to vocalize any concerns we might have on pending legislation, so I support the move.
Just to weigh in, just for consideration, I teach a Monday through Friday course in the summer, usually wrapping up first week, sliding into the second week of June.
So the third week of June may work best for you.
So well, looking at the calendar now, if we if we moved it forward by 1 week, that would still be after I'm done, but just for consideration.
I would appreciate staff's investigation.
Any other comments on the 2020 meeting calendar? Any public comment? And no need to take action today, right? Right, okay. Okay. Let's slide into agenda item number 8, Executive Officers Report.
So I did things a little bit differently for this meeting because I wanted to provide kind of a tidbit for each of those subcategories that I listed in, or I normally list on the agenda. And so sometimes if it's an application and licensing section and I don't have any kind of highlight, I don't speak, and it's just a boilerplate. And so to try and kind of fill that boilerplate with something that's a little bit more substantive, I wanted to draw the board's attention to a couple different things. So in the Administrative Services Report, we do have 2 vacancies that we're recruiting. We do want to say and bid a fond farewell to Araceli Straumeyer, who was the board's member liaison. You're all familiar with her. She's gone on to the Department of Motor Vehicles in accepting a promotion, so we wish her the best. Mm-hmm. We will continue to try and fill those 2 vacancies as quickly as possible because in admin services, that is essentially kind of our support staff to the rest of the mission critical units, right? So when admin is suffering from vacancies, all of the units at the board feel that strain. So I really want them to understand that they are the hub and kind of keeping things moving throughout the board. So we'll try to fill those vacancies as quickly as possible. For application services, Vincent Azar and I have been taking our newly found tools to access the data that we have available to us in the Qbert reporting system and really kind of playing around in that data to try and see, some of the things that we can flush out of it. And a couple things that I wanted to bring to the board's attention was what I would call a post-Breeze highlight. So we're in our 3rd year of Breeze. And so we used that data to kind of create a couple new reports. And one of those was, as an example, how many applicants utilize online services as opposed to the old paper form. And so we're actually able to filter out some of that data. For the year of 2016, only 18% of our applicants utilized the online application process.
How many?
18%. In that year, we received 2,624 applications, but only 470 utilized the online process. Within the first year, we doubled that from 2017 at 18% and 2016 at 18%. 2017 jumped up to 39%. In 2018, it jumped up to 64. And to date, for 2019, we're at 89%.
Nice.
And so that kind of speaks to just that campaign of trying to go green and mobilizing those education programs to take advantage of that. The other thing that I think that was interesting to find is trying to establish a timeline that would be interesting to the stakeholder, right? So, and it's a very difficult statistic to kind of feather out. Once an application is received, what's the average time it takes for that application to be processed all the way to licensure, right? Start to finish. Well, we've managed to kind of filter through the data to figure out a way to come up with that. In 2016, the average was 109 days, start to finish. In 2017, we lost a couple days, went down to 112. Took a little bit longer. In 2018, we're at 98 days. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is 98 days is just roughly a little over that 3 months. Our exam schedule is a quarterly exam schedule. So that's really the anchor inside of that data that speaks to maybe part of that delay. They could have everything that they need, but they're going to be waiting for that pending score. Mm-hmm. And so I think that demonstrates we've made efficiencies, but there's not much more we can do to get underneath that, because the exam is always going to be that last deficiency that needs to be fulfilled, and that's given on a schedule. So, but we also want to take that data and try to use some of the efficiencies that we've done in other areas, right? So while we've encouraged people to do their application online, we're now going to start encouraging them to do name changes and address changes and duplicate requests and endorsement requests to see if we can get those same kind of effect and expedite that process for them as well. We've always done pretty well with existing licensees utilizing online services, and that's because we were doing online renewals before Breeze even started. Right, we had a kind of a makeshift system in place, and so that wasn't so much a new thing for licensees to experience. But we have seen an increase. In 2016, 73% of the renewals were processed online. To date, we're up to 83%. So we've seen a significant, not 10% increase, but it's still something to point out. For continuing competency, I would just, in the materials you'll see, we enjoy a pretty favorable pass rate for our PTs and PTAs, 80s and 90% pass rate, and just keeping in mind that, that we see that process as another opportunity to conduct some outreach with our licensees and have them come into compliance and seek compliance with those regulations. And so sometimes throughout the audit process, we help them with that. But we will be looking at the next steps in CC and moving towards auditing content of courses, approvers, and recognized approval agencies. For consumer protection services, I think there's, in the statistics you'll see, there's an anomaly that I kind of wanted to draw your attention to. And notably, that's that the number of complaints received has gone down, but you'll see the number that have resulted after investigation in formal discipline have gone up. And you can attribute that to a couple different things, and that's just kind of the overwhelming complexity of healthcare in general, and it's becoming more complex over time. The evolution of the profession itself, and streamlining that, we've improved the quality of the case process, meaning each case is actually getting a little bit more one-on-one attention, and we're prioritizing those cases much more efficiently. And so we're seeing that while the complaints have gone down, the complexity of the cases has increased significantly, almost 100%, right? So this time last year, we have a significant number of cases that have been sent to the Attorney General's office compared to last year. For outreach, April will give you her presentation today for some of the particulars, but one thing that, is different than normal is that in collaboration with the Department of Consumer Affairs, we're going to be partnering and doing a licensing fair at West Hills Community College District in Lemoore next month. And so these aren't enrolled students in any kind of program. This is kind of reaching out to them before they even get to that point. So they are, recent graduates from high school entering the community college level, and they're looking for professions and things that they might want to do with their futures. And so we're going to set up a booth and be there to answer any kind of questions that they might have as far as requirements when it comes to the physical therapy profession.
And you were asked to do that by who?
I think West Hills probably reached out to DCA, but DCA in collaboration is trying to involve as many of the DCA boards and bureaus that have those kind of resources. So I know as of now there are 2 other boards that will be joining us that day as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's a new form of outreach, and so we're excited about that. For the PTBC relocation, we are on track. We received the latest revision of our blueprints for what our suite is going to look like upstairs. We're on track, but it's a slow-moving process, but we expect to close out lease negotiations in May of this year. So, and then for the strategic plan, staff have been actively working on the plan. We've created a display that staff can use as a gauge of success, a series of posters located in each unit that map out the unit's stated goals and objectives from the strategic plan. It's just a visual representation that they can see daily of where they are in the process. It's a good motivator, and apparently it stimulates competition amongst the units as well. So there's a poster that has a thermometer with their goals and objectives, and everybody wants their thermometers to be more full than the other units' thermometers. So, and that's all I have for the O report.
Any board comments or questions?
I have a comment on the outreach to the community college students or those pursuing higher education of some sort and not really sure what path they want to go down. This is something I'm excited about because it's not something we've been able to do in the past due to travel restrictions. And I would encourage the board staff to pursue neighborhoods or areas where there are communities of color where they don't really pursue physical therapy as a profession. I like Lemoore, but it tends to be a little bit more similar to our current demographics of our population. Sure. So just food for thought.
And I think we're looking for every opportunity, really, at that point. April itself is going to be a very busy month. We have that fair that we're going to be going to with DCA, but we also have 2 schools in 2 days in the Southern California area because we're trying to address needs, but travel can be very difficult to just do a 1-day, 2, 4, maybe 6-hour course at the most. So we've managed to get 2 schools together so we can hit one school and then the next. But in answer to your comment, yeah, absolutely. If there is anything out there that we can do to increase awareness of this program and this profession, we'll do what we can.
Jason, do you know the 2 schools in SoCal?
Northridge is the first day, and then there's a local PTA program that we're going to be visiting on the second day on our return flight home.
Good news for the percentage of applications online. And I'm just wondering if in the future we can tease out if those submitting paper applications are coming from certain programs, or is it sporadic?
We've already added that to our list of campaigns. So there are certain programs, in particular PTA programs, that they offer a service to their students where they'll handle that portion for them. And unfortunately, just in doing that, where they're paying their application fee and licensing fees and those kind of things, that isn't allowed for in the online system, so they tend to pay in a bulk. We'll receive a package with a check and issued to each name. And so we're looking at ways of trying to incentivize those programs to do it differently, do it more on the electronic side of thing. And if that means staff and I will have to go to that school and do a classroom application process so that it all is done online, those are things that we're playing with the idea.
Should they get their licenses, they're going to be encouraged to renew online anyway. And
Absolutely.
they might want to.
Yeah.
It also just puts in my head the thought that it's the idea of having somebody else take care of it is a nice thing, but in a way it removes my responsibility for my license. And me completing an application for something has a little bit more depth of commitment on my part when I need to do it, rather than having somebody else do it for me. Like, oh yeah, that got done.
It definitely comes across as being kind of one step below a very like participatory process for them to involve themselves in and have a chance to interact with board staff and that kind of thing. And I'm sure that that's the incentive, right? That's one of the things that they were looking for, is to avoid some of the red tape in getting into the profession and having the program coordinator help them with that. And so I see the incentive. I just have to figure out ways to counterbalance it and come up with ideas. Right off the bat, once they submit that application on paper, they've delayed themselves by almost 2 weeks in processing when it comes to mail and cashing checks and DCA Central Services cashiering unit, where if they would have just done it online and paid with a credit card, it's almost instantaneous. You know, the application process starts instantaneously. They still have to do the application process, but if they submit on paper, the application process itself doesn't even start for about 10 to 14 days. So we're trying to really stress that at that program education level with their directors and see where it goes from there.
Okay. Just wondering for strategic plan if there are any types of benchmarks that we're moving toward meeting our goals that can be shared.
Yeah, I think you'll hear some of those
Okay.
throughout the statistical reports today. I don't want to steal staff's thunder, so.
Thank you. Any other comment on the executive officer's report from board members? And any public comment? Come on up. Yeah, come on up to the microphone, introduce yourself.
Either mic.
Yeah, I'm not sure, is it on?
Either.
Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Go ahead, have a seat, yeah.
David Campbell, licensed PT in California, 17642. I reside in Oakland. Question for Mr. Kaiser. That was an interesting finding in item D, I believe, was consumer protection. So if I heard correctly, incidence is down, but complexity is up.
Absolutely.
Could you describe that or say that's an interesting finding? Just maybe an example or two, or just any more light to shine on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to look at when it comes to when we receive a complaint and the investigation that's applied to it. We run that through a priority matrix right off of the bat, right? And that priority matrix will put the most egregious cases at the top and those things that are a little bit more rudimentary at the bottom. And we have some new tools, handed to us through legislation to allow a way to address those less egregious cases with letters of education or a citation, something that's non-disciplinary in matter. And so we can divert that statistic from that pathway right away. And so that's been a big advance and a big help for us. The other thing is we've collaborated with the Division of Investigation and looked for ways to increase communication and updates to keep a case on track so that the aging that doesn't have to occur doesn't occur. And then the complexity of it, I think, is really just the profession and its placement in healthcare, and that there are certain models asking PTs to do things that would result in a complaint or a finding of a complaint. And so we're kind of having to battle with those kind of things also.
So would they be ethical breaches? Are they
Ethical
around competence or incompetence or
ethical
combination?
and documentation are probably the most common.
Okay.
Payment models that are, creating evaluations and then the PT's gone from that practice after that point and all the care is being administered by assistive personnel. And so ethical in the sense that that patient should still be considered as that PT's patient.
I see.
But that PT's moved on to other things, evaluations at another practice even. So,
Thank you very much.
yeah, no problem.
Thanks for coming today, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. It's an
Yeah,
honor to
feel,
be here.
feel free to step on up at any of these public comment sessions.
Thank you.
Okay. So it looks like we can move into agenda item number 9. That would be the discussion and possible board action for the increase in the exempt level of the executive officer. And so let's start with a report from the committee. Ms. Ellaby and Mr. Watkins.
Yeah, I will lead on this.
Is this on?
Thank you for the reminder. So, at the last board meeting, we discussed preparing a letter to Alexis Podesta with regard to the outcome of the previous exempt level increase request. And then we decided the committee decided to reach out to the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. And, they responded. And the discussion turned fruitful by way of new information coming to us. So I want to thank the board's previous liaison, Deputy Secretary Sonia Logman, for clarifying some of the issues to the committee, and a way to possibly move forward in our next application or packet for an exempt level increase to get the desired outcome. We got part of it, but we didn't get what we ultimately desired. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. But since then, the Deputy Secretary, our liaison, moved on she was appointed to the cabinet, so congratulations to her for that promotion. And now we have a new liaison. So we as the committee, we're looking forward to meeting with the new liaison and discussing some of these new ideas that we have when we present our package at the Department of Consumer Services and Housing Agency. So, during that process, the committee recommended withdrawing the letter after we found, there's a way to work through this without going to that extent. And at the same time, we committed to preparing a packet that would probably be more successful in achieving our desired exempt level increase this time. So, in essence, to wrap this up, we feel that moving forward, it is, the committee would like to meet with the new liaison and then bring in DCA, who has done an incredible job to help us get to where we are, and work with each of the different departments to prepare the best packet that we can to achieve the desired level increase. And so I'm looking forward to meeting all of the people, and I'm sure Ms. Ellaby as well, to bring forth the desired exempt level increase. So that wraps it on that issue
Thank you.
for now.
Any comments or questions from board members for the committee?
So you said there was some new information. It was that impactful, or did it?
The new information has to do with becoming more aware of this process, and when we prepare a packet to go to DCA and then it end up in front of the consumer agency, there is some leeway. So when they interpret the document, they ultimately make a recommendation and they see where it goes. There's ways that we can motivate this slightly different that I will, that is more detailed that I'll explain to anybody that wants to know. But what immediately became apparent that there is an opportunity. And pushing and shoving forward just runs into a brick wall. And we decided that there's a better way, or at least a different way. And now the committee, we want to pursue that different way and use some of the information. Some of it is nuanced as well, just to position us better to get the desired outcome. So I know that was kind of vague. So that gives you a real indication of what I'm talking about, because everything comes through that vague.
So I'm super proud of how we have stayed committed in this. But what kind of timeline now does this present? Approximate.
Well, if you ask me, I would want to say, ASAP. But that's me. I think everything has ASAP written behind it. But experience has shown us that this is a process. So we will probably know better after our initial meetings about what the timeline is. But I'm embracing the process to see, okay, where we can speed along and where it is absolutely important to take a moment and get clear. And so we have, a packet in that we want to present in this board meeting, and we'll take that as a base and kind of modify it or bring it in alignment with some of these nuances. And I think that will put us in a better position. But I am looking forward to, reporting back on this, because I, like I said, would like this in a shorter time frame. So that's my commitment to the shorter time frame.
Any other board discussion, comment? I'll just say thank you to both of you for being on this committee and working toward this effort. And I've worked with Ms. Ellaby before trying to move forward on this. And so now she'll carry the torch with Mr. Watkins. And I respect and trust both of you, and just thank you for pushing forward.
Well, thank you.
It's an important endeavor, and so we're happy to pursue this on behalf of the board.
And I'm not sure. Yeah, this is agenda item number 9. So we did get some information by paper regarding this subject. And I'm not sure if board members had a chance to look through this yet, or if there's any comment on this at all.
As a result of the last meeting, so staff, what you have before you is essentially an updated version of the packages that you're familiar with from our past requests. So the data has been freshened up to reflect the time period since the last request, and then as well as a draft letter, very similar to the letters sent previously. But if there's any questions about any of the materials, I did notice that there's a landscape portrait issue with some of the printing that is in there, and we'll fix that before submission if that's the board's wish.
Thank you for supplying us with this updated version. Yeah.
Yeah, Jason, can you give us some of the organizational structure, just to give us a picture of what it is, so now we have fresh data that will underpin the motivation for the exempt level increase, but we have this in that structure. What is it that we want to achieve at that top level of the structure?
Yeah, we're transitioning from what they would identify as being a small board to a medium-sized board. And so there's a lot of growing pains that go along with that. And for us, it is an increase in just about every category. The licensing population itself has grown. Staff has grown, not quite at that same ratio, but we're catching up. And in doing that, we need more square footage. So that, it's all kind of a spider web that's interconnected. We're moving from 4,400 square feet to 8,000 square feet. And within that, as we add staff to each individual unit, whether it be applications and licensing or consumer protection services, those units become more compartmentalized and more specialized, right? And so looking back at our kind of our historical structure, there's essentially always been two units, licensing and enforcement. Well, licensing has grown to the extent that now applications is separate from licensing. We're dealing with applicants with specialized staff, and we're dealing with licensees with specialized staff. As that grows and we add new units, continuing competency, the probation monitoring unit, those kind of things, board grows, board staff grows. The structure required to delegate authority to those staff is required as well. So we went from a board that had an executive officer and an assistant executive officer to a board that has an executive officer, no assistant executive officer, but 3 managers. And those 3 managers all have their designated staff below them. So the complexity of the org chart has changed a little bit over time, but we expect it to change more as we grow. And it does. There's no signs that we're flatlining. We're continuing to grow from one quarter to another. So, and kind of what I alluded to with admin and just while we have moved from a small to a medium-sized board, we're not so large that we can absorb any kind of vacancy. Anytime we have somebody that steps out, takes a promotion, and we have that delay in replacing that person, we're still at that point where we really feel the crunch. All that work that they had to do now has to be disseminated amongst other staff, which adds to it. And we're not at a point where there's no such thing as minor absorbable for us right now. We're still taking on new tasks, and as a result of things like the strategic plan, focusing things on outreach and education, and diverting resources from that right now just isn't advisable. So as we grow, we expect that org chart to go with it. If there was an executive officer or assistant executive officer in between the EO and the SSM1s, the managers over each unit, it would really kind of free up resources. We would be able to do things much more efficiently.
Where are we with that?
We do have a request in the works, and all signs are looking to positive. If everything goes according to plan, we'll have authority for that position and a couple other positions July 1. And then after July 1, obviously, there'll be a recruitment process to try and find the right person for that fit.
And so on attachment 7, is that the org chart that you're talking about?
That's the org chart as it exists today.
Okay. And with what might get approved on July 1st, the change to this org chart would be an AEO,
Which would,
with a couple of other positions underneath.
Correct.
But, yes, but that would be the big.
that would be one of our most significant changes to date. And it's something
Okay.
that we've been looking forward to for a really long time. It helps with delegation of authority. The EO can't be in 2 places at one time. Having an assistant executive officer really assists in that matter. If I happen to be out of the office when it comes to things like signature authority, that really helps out quite a bit, having an AEO. And then at some point you will see, the EO or the executive staff at that point might also have some clerical staff under them. And so right now we won't have that luxury. But that's something that we would look forward to in the future as well.
Mr. Watkins, did you have any follow-up comment or question?
That AEO position and the delegation of authority and freeing up the executive officer, when we insert that into the organizational chart, I think it would be a great wait to see when we fit in this position what it will end up looking like. You know, maybe in, you know, what would look like the first 3 months, and then adding the next position and that position to build it out so that this is a great visual representation to see, you know, how the responsibilities are attached to the different,
Absolutely.
you know, staff managers and all of it. And I think it would just help us up a lot in putting forth the case for all of the things that we're asking for, because this affects that exempt level increase that we talked about earlier.
And so what you just described and we just talked about is what we can create with exempt level N.
Yeah, the issue that you'll see, should we be successful and attain that authority July 1, one of the initial complications that we're going to have to address is the managers of the units being at that classification, having an AEO come in over them, one classification above them as part of reporting, essentially is the same classification that I'm sitting in. So that's going to create kind of like a compaction issue, meaning that that AEO position at the SSM2 level is essentially where I'm at right now. So it creates a ceiling that's too low, right? And that's essentially what this whole request is about, is trying to address one of those issues.
And so maybe the committee can take a look at the organizational chart and what our board really needs, you know, what it looks like under exempt level L.
Yeah. And that's exactly the direction that we were planning to take, because we saw that, you know, we need 12-foot ceilings and we were sitting at 6. So just to be...
Yeah.
So this is definitely the structure that we were thinking of. So it all makes sense.
Are there any questions regarding the package itself, data contained in it, other than org? I know that you're all probably tired of seeing it and very familiar with the data behind it, but if there's anything that I can answer, I'd be happy to.
Well, it was great to see fresh data. Like you said, we see this quite often, and when you see the fresh data and you look at there's movement in other spaces, and, you know, that makes me, you know, more positive about, you know, the outcome that we seek, because the water is just flowing in that direction.
One of the things that's kind of rewarding from that, from the staff perspective, is that because we've done this a couple times now, the projections that we made in previous packages have come to fruition in this data. So it's kind of rewarding just to see that what we thought was going to happen has, that we were accurate in our projections, which is just kind of a confidence builder in the projections that we've shown here moving forward.
Okay. Any further board comment? And is there any public comment?
I have a recommendation. At the September meeting, the board moved to establish a committee to draft that letter and then present it the following meeting. And then at the December meeting, the board moved to authorize the president to present the letter. So now it's the third meeting with our new committee. So I recommend a motion to further authorize and delegate the next steps. So what I heard was Board Member Watkins mention a request to continue communication process with a liaison. And then I also heard comments about the desire to have the committee continue to investigate the org chart and see what that looks like under the level L. Sorry if my terms I'm using aren't correct, but just recommending a motion that kind of clearly delineates who is going to be doing what and what authority the committee has.
I agree. I don't know how to put that all into good wording right now.
I might recommend a motion that says, I move to authorize but then you kind of have to fill in the blanks for me here because I'm not sure, exactly what the board wants exactly. But I move to authorize the committee, because presumably some authorities went in committee, and then come up with like a 1, 2, 3 to do X, Y, Z. You may want to defer to and ask the committee what this particular steps they want to engage in. But I'll be taking notes, fill in the blank, the committee, and then I don't know if any other further authorization or delegation is being made, such as to the president or anyone else, or is it just to the committee?
So I believe the board members would like the committee to continue to work with DCA and the Bureau toward putting together the best package for applying for exempt level L. And to include our desired organizational level chart. Or what would you call that chart? Did I get that right, Mr. Kaiser?
The exempt level classification.
Exempt level classification organization chart?
The chart.
I think the first thing would be the exempt level increase.
Yes.
And then second, which it kind of ties in with, is presenting that a new organizational chart.
To create a proposed organizational chart reflecting the new changes. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Will the board want the committee to bring back these documents for the rest of the board to look at before it's presented to the DCA and the Bureau, agency?
Mm-hmm.
The proposed org chart, I think, is good for conversation's sake and for the committee and the board members to be aware of. It's not essentially an item that would be part of what a request package would include. It would be helpful.
So is that a recommendation to not bring it back to the board, or?
It's not something that we've ever put into the packages or any of the other research that we've done as a request, but I could see where it is a requirement to show what the existing structure looks like so that the approving authority can see what changes would be made. We just haven't gone so far as to kind of draw them a picture of, the difference between what we're asking for and what is existing. Mm-hmm. That's why I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, sorry, and I'm not saying that it should be included in the board meeting materials. Sure. If it's normally a internal document or personnel document. It's just something that is it normally something the committee would do, or something that would be done?
It's normally something that would happen as a result of, right? So if the change was approved through DCAHR and all of the approving powers, we would have to update the org chart accordingly, right? It's kind of it's nice to see that in advance to help somebody make a decision, but it's something that ultimately is going to happen regardless, so.
Yeah, I guess what my thoughts are that if it's an internal document, like a day-to-day a board administration type document that is not necessary for board consumption, I'm not sure if that's a committee task or if it's just a staff level task. But if it is something the committee's doing, it would seem that that's something that would be relevant for a board meeting. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure about all the details of this, so I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think if it's the committee's wish, staff will work with the committee to provide that to them. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Whether it's part of the final decision is moving forward with the process, I think I leave that up to the board.
I guess what you kind of indicated is it would be something provided to the committee. So I guess when I'm trying to, create the motion, I think a part of the language I heard was for the committee to create the chart. So is the committee creating it, or is board staff creating it?
I think board staff will have to create it on the committee's behalf.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
then it wouldn't, that's all I was trying to
Yeah.
pin down. So it wouldn't be for the committee to create.
I think the most clear we can be is that the committee goes out, continue the investigation, finds the information, I'll put together the packet that will ultimately give us the desired exempt level increase. That's the gist of it. What happens within that is going to happen if we have requests, the committee to have the organizational chart and all of it, that I think will be internal. But the ultimate goal of what the committee will be doing is further the investigation so that we can present the packet to the board. That will be the best chance for us to get our desired exempt level increase.
Okay. So it might be something like a motion to authorize the committee to continue to work with the Department of Consumer Affairs and the agency, whole title,
Yeah.
the agency, towards creating, and I think the language that was used was the best package for the exempt level L,
Yeah.
and to include the new organization chart.
I guess
We
we'll
can
take
drop
that out.
We
Yeah,
can drop that.
Okay.
we'll take that out. And maybe just add, come up with the package and then report back to the board with the draft.
Yes,
Perfect.
Yeah.
that's what I said.
Any comments, Ms. Ellaby?
I'm looking at Jason.
Oh, Jason?
If it might be essentially that's what you have before you now, is the package request with a draft letter, which was requested at the last meeting to be prepared for this meeting. Are there changes to this package that we anticipate making and bringing back to the next meeting?
I don't think there are changes from staff and what you've presented to us. If there's any new information that the committee gets that will help our cause to go forward, I think that's the information we're waiting to hear.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the best way to present that information and to get through the investigation, the best way to present that information. Is this the best form? What needs to be highlighted? What are some of the things that has a more pertinent role in our presentation versus just giving, we have all the information, but the way we structure it possibly will be different.
For the board members, this is beautiful, and this is what we have, this is what we've had, this is what we turn in, and then we get the answer that we get. But if there's anything else, any other information that can help this that we haven't done in the past, I'm really anxious to hear what that might be, to increase our chances of getting it approved.
Yes.
And I guess I want to hear just a little bit more about what those things are, what those pieces are about and for my decision as to why we shouldn't proceed now and get the ball moving rather than kicking the can down the road when we're not sure what might happen. If it's only if there's only another alley for us to look down to see what might be there, then I'm not so sure it's worth taking that time. But if there's opportunity to move forward right now and we're not going to have significant changes, within the next, with whatever we find down that alley, then I'm not so sure we should pursue that.
So, Mr. Watkins, yes.
I'm sorry, just before you go further, I don't know if it's things that you want to say on the record, if it's things that might need to be better discussed in closed session when we have opportunity to discuss the EO level increase or the EO performance, if that might be more appropriate.
I think that would probably be more appropriate, since we will talk about. I could speak to a part of this right now. And the part of this that I have, that what we've uncovered is, this is pretty much the same package that we presented in our prior request. And it gave us some of the result. Right now, we have an opportunity based on some new information that I would best describe as nuance in how we can, and there's some structural things that we can do. One of the things that we're heading towards is this, ceiling that we are facing. And that's a very compelling reason for bringing for this new packet. And it's compelling because it wasn't highlighted previously. And right now, or it wasn't highlighted quite as much, or they didn't interpret our highlighting of it.
Before we go too far, I just want to make one very distinction or point of clarification. There's two different processes that have been mentioned here, and that one is pursuing an exempt level increase, which is that raising of that ceiling and speaks to structure. And then the second process being the evaluation of the executive officer's performance.
Right.
Being completely separate, which is very difficult to do sometimes. Those things kind of interlace, but that reference to what could be discussed in closed session, what could be discussed in open session, if it is exempt status ceiling related, it's here. If it's my performance, as an example, it's appropriate to have in closed session at that point. I just want to make sure that we keep that separation.
Yeah, that was the distinction I was making in my mind there. Mm-hmm. And so, just to answer that question more, if there's anything that we could do different with this packet, or whether it be in the way we present it or anything that could possibly get us a better outcome, then it is probably worthwhile just waiting a little longer, as opposed to waiting another year if it gets denied or rejected, or if we don't get what we want. Because the last result we got was, I don't remember the date, but it was probably in the last year. And so the time elapsed between the last outcome that we get and this is pretty soon. So time is on our side when we want to present this moving forward. That's why I pointed out that this is a process. And again, we're at the front end of a new process that took us previously 2 years, or from 2016 to 2018. And so what we are committing to is to find the best information from the relevant sources, so that we can present that, not just in the hope that we get it, but that there's actually a real push behind it, that we increase our chances that we can get that desired level increase. Because we're almost there, but I think if we just pause a moment and think clearly through it, based on new information. And like I said, some of this information is nuanced, because we are talking about people interpreting the information that sees information all the time. And they may have felt perfectly okay by the previous result as the perfect result. And now we want to just make a case for why we need that extra step. And that is the point of clarification. That is the distinction with making this new packet.
If I may, and TJ, please correct me if I'm wrong. We've had a transition in our board liaison, and there's the potential to gather more information and collaborate with our new liaison, which is my interpretation of why we are sort of pacing ourselves before we are ready to submit. Is that accurate, TJ?
Yes. I think there's a real opportunity now with a new liaison and our existing relationships with DCA that has been very helpful to actually present this with our experience over the last few years to really, highlight the blind spots of our application and highlight our strengths. My goal is just to highlight our strengths and present the strongest package from their perspective, based on input that they have given, not from our perspective, because it obviously didn't always align.
So I get a sense that we're hopefully getting a little more collaboration, to use your word, Ms. Ellaby, and we might be able to be more successful with that.
Correct. I think we had a very strong case in the past, but now with newer, fresher data, different individuals in different positions, I think it is much wiser to take our time and tread lightly while we navigate this new space. So I'd like to give TJ an extra accolade for his time and commitment to meet with individuals. Unfortunately, due to my work schedule, I'm not able to participate in these meetings, but I'm very much so appreciative of his efforts to be present for this process.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we have, suddenly time has become one of our leverages, just through structural things that are happening. Suddenly there's a deadline of July 1 for a structural change. And how I see it is that when time becomes on your side, you use it, because it's like the glass is filling up right now. But it's filling up to the point where it's going to spill over if we don't switch the water to a bigger cup. I want to use that little window of opportunity to just make the case. So that is my motivation for wanting more time.
So I think the motion can be as simple as authorize the committee to work with DCA and BSCH to research the exempt level increase and prepare a package requesting an exempt level change to be voted on by the board at the next meeting.
Would it also include a direction to staff to create that organizational chart?
I don't think I would do that for any member who ever requested it. I don't think that it necessarily means
it's not something for the package. I don't know, because I'm hearing something about a deadline and that needing to be created.
And I think that's why having the committee work with DCA and BCH to research the exempt level increase allows for any other further documentation that they think might be needed based on whatever those conversations with new liaisons might be.
Okay, so I guess then my recommendation is to work with DCA, the agency, and board staff, because it's neither DCA or agency that's creating this chart. So your motion, but then plus
and
board staff.
That makes sense. Anyone want to move?
I'll move.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Watkins, second by Dr. Drummer. Any further board discussion?
Just to clarify, in this packet, there's a letter to Nicole Lee, and then the package follows. So this is on pause. It's not going to be sent to Nicole Lee. Committee is going to work on it. Okay, just clarify. Okay.
Any public comment? And a roll call vote?
Alicia Rabene Amen.
Aye.
TJ Watkins.
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez,
Aye.
Daniel Drummer,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby,
Aye.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
6-0, motion carried.
Okay, the time is 10:25, and we have a request for a 10-minute recess, and we'll come back at 10:35. On record, and we'll be picking up with. It's 10:38. We're back on record, and we'll pick up with agenda item number 10, which is Consumer and Professional Associations and Intergovernmental Relations reports, and we'll start with item A FSBPT report, and we'll have that report by Ms. Ellaby, who is our delegate this year.
So, we have the Leadership Issues Forum coming up on July 13th and 14th. That's going to be in Alexandria, Virginia. In addition, in August, on the 16th through the 18th, the regulatory training for members and board staff, including legal counsel, will be held in Alexandria, Virginia. And as I mentioned earlier, while we were going over the calendar for 2019, the FSBPT annual meeting will be held October 24th through the 26th at OKC, Oklahoma City. We also have some of our board staff and board members participating at the committee and task force level. Dr. Dominguez was appointed to the Education Committee. Dr. Dominguez, would you like to comment on that?
Just an update. So we've had sort of an orientation teleconference meeting that it was last several weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I believe. We're scheduled to have another meeting, teleconference, believe in May. And we're just looking forward, or I'm looking forward anyway, to sort of participating on that. We had a pretty large list of proposed topics or potential topics anyway for education in the session. And I think Dr. Rubina Amen might have some more suggestions for me that I can pass along to the committee.
We also have Jason, who was appointed to the Board Assessment and Licensure Enforcement Task Forces. In addition, Dr. Rubina Amen was appointed to the Member Survey Task Force. Dr. Rubina Amen, I know that you worked on the Foreign Educated in the past on that committee. Mm-hmm. The Member Survey Task Force, were they in charge of the recent survey that went out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And when will the results of that survey be made available?
I believe the results will come out at LIFE
Okay.
in the summertime.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
After reviewing several of the FSBPT newsletters, I just wanted to highlight that the PT Compact has been introduced in 6 states at the legislative level in Virginia, Arkansas, Georgia, Maryland, Michigan, and Nevada, in case anybody was curious as to where that was moving down the pipeline.
And those states they've enacted?
It's been introduced.
Introduced.
Yes. I'm not sure if it's been enacted into law quite yet.
And does anyone know how many states are actually issuing compact privileges? I think the last I heard, there was just one state actually issuing compact privileges.
The last update information that I had is that 19 states were in the compact and now 4 states issuing privileges.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ms. Allaby, thank you for that report.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Anything to add? No? Okay. Any public comment on FSBPT report? And let's move to item C for CPTA. I'm sorry, item C, 10C.
10C.
Agenda item 10C. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Stacy Defoe. I'm Executive Director for California Physical Therapy Association. And just a couple of things that we want to talk with you about today. Just a reminder on a couple of things that we have coming up. Next week, we have our Advocacy Day at the Capitol. That's Tuesday, March 26th, and so hopefully some of you are planning to attend. And we welcome also PT board staff if you want to come and attend in the morning and just hear what we've got going on. Meet some of the PTs. That would be great too. You're more than welcome. That's next week. And then in April 13th, we have our student conclave at UOP, and the PT board will be represented there. So we're really happy about that you'll be there.
Stacy, that's the 18th. It was the 18th then. That's a Thursday?
I have it on the 13th, which is a Saturday.
13th.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Saturday. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Annual conference, again this year, is in Las Vegas. So I know that puts maybe some limitations on participation, but hopefully some of you will be there just to participate on your own, and that's October 12th and 13th in Las Vegas. And then we have a couple of, or we have a bill this year that we're sponsoring, and it's on your list, on your legislation list, so I can come back and talk about that a little bit more when it comes up, but it's SB 537. It's being authored by Jerry Hill, who is the chair of the Senate Labor Committee. So we have a really good author for that, and we'll be looking to address some of the issues related to third-party administrators in the workers' comp system, specifically in the workers' comp system. There are issues related outside of the workers' comp system as well, but this is where we feel like we might be able to have the ability to regulate some things for California workers. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. Right now it's in a spot bill form, so the information that you have in front of you doesn't say a whole lot. We can get into that a little bit more. And then, of course, we'll be watching AB 1592, which is authored by Bonta. And we don't know exactly, right now that's in spot bill form as well. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. It's the athletic trainer licensure bill. As of now, we think it'll probably look a lot like it did last year, but we're not sure. And both of these bills, we're estimating that real language outside of the spot form should be available early next week. And then hearings will start in early April on both of those. Okay. Any questions about what we have going on? Okay, I'll be back.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And we're going to take up agenda item 10B tomorrow with a report from Department of Consumer Affairs. And so since we do have member of the public in the audience, I'd just like to invite David Campbell. If there's anything that you'd like to approach the board and ask or bring up, you're certainly welcome to come up and ask.
That be now in particular?
Sure, we'll take a moment now.
Should I introduce myself again? Okay. David Campbell, PT, licensed, California 17642, residing in Oakland. And I looked at the agenda both days, and I wasn't sure if I saw an item regarding continuing competency. So education in particular, is that an item, do you recall, either today or tomorrow? I won't be here, so that's why I'm wondering.
There is a section open for tomorrow that is more of a statistical reporting. It's just the staff's reporting to the board. But if there's questions about continuing competency that aren't on the agenda, that's what we've opened up now. Is that if there's anything that you have as far as concerns or questions that you don't see included on the agenda.
Thank you. Then I do have one question briefly. In recent years, my experience with continuing education has been that the burden of documentation of course completion is put on the attendee rather than the course provider providing the documentation. Typically that wouldn't be a problem, but in the law of averages, my experience has been you get the email, it says you have the code, and you go to the site, the link, and you try to download. Sometimes there's a glitch or otherwise. I'm wondering, has this been taken up as an issue in the past, and that is that it would be required for, you pay your money, you complete the course, that when you walk away you have certification in hand? Or has that ever been discussed as an item or been an issue raised or worthy of consideration for that matter?
There is a requirement in law today that provider should be able to provide you with a completion certificate upon completion of that course. And as far as any kind of change or leaning from onus on licensee to onus on the provider, we tried to account for that in those regulations, in that the requirement for retention for you as a licensee is 5 years, but the provider has to retain records for 7. So if there's ever a situation where you don't have something, you should be able to go back to that provider to get a duplicate of some kind in the case you were audited or something like that. But a consideration of changing who's responsible for that retention, those conversations had never been had.
I see. Okay.
And just to clarify, what you were discussing is for courses that have been provided by an authorized provider or an approved provider or by an authorized approval agency.
Correct.
So courses that have not necessarily had that approval or haven't gone through that process
May not
have.
adhere to those requirements.
Okay.
It's an important distinction.
Absolutely. And we try to, as best we can, educate our licensees to make sure that beforehand, in taking a course, make an effort to make sure that that is an accredited California course for you, so you're not necessarily wasting your time because the content may be very valuable to you, but at least that you could get credit for it.
Right, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thanks for coming forward.
Thank you again.
Okay, looks like we might be ready for agenda item number 14, DCA budget. And we have our DCA budget manager, Robert De Los Reyes, present.
Good morning, Board President, Board members, Jason, Brooke. Glad to be back to provide a budget update for you all today. So today, I'm not sure if the handouts were given to you, but we do have a handout, the fund condition statement that you're all probably very familiar with. We're going to use that to provide more context to our updates that we have for today. Just wanted to make sure, Carl, did you present on the budget report?
I haven't presented yet, but I can wait until after you.
Okay, awesome. So with that said, my name is Robert De Los Reyes. I've been managing the board's budget for quite some time now. I'm here with Sarah Hinkle, who is the new budget analyst for the board, and we're here to provide a few updates. So just to provide a quick refresher how the fund condition works. So this is a tool that we use in the budget office to really assess the long-term financial sustainability of the board. So it really takes what you collect in revenue each fiscal year as well as what you spend every fiscal year to provide kind of more context, I guess you could say, to how that affects your fund. Really, this document is read from top to bottom, up to down. We show 4 fiscal years here. So starting with the prior year, 17-18, and showing budget year +1 to give more of a anticipated spending after the budget year. So we always begin with a beginning balance, and we take your revenues in account and your spending to kind of see how that impacts your fund. And how we measure that is through months in reserve. And what that means is if the board, in an event that stops collecting revenue, that measures to how long you can sustain yourselves in a given fiscal year. So there's really no floor in law to what we have to adhere to, but there is a ceiling, which is 24 months in reserve. So glad to report that the board is between, I would say, well, let me take a step back. There's no floor in law, but we do have a rule of thumb in the budget office that we like to keep, which is 3 months. And usually if a board or bureau would fall below that threshold, we would begin discussions with them to ensure that we have options on the table to ensure that the fund could remain solvent for the foreseeable future. With that said, the board's fund is between the 3-month threshold as well as the 24-month threshold ceiling. So glad to report no concerns on our end, and you're operating within those levels. My first update, at least, I want to point your attention to the fund condition expenditures 1111, Department of Consumer Affairs, Regulatory Board, Bureau, Division, State Operations line there. If you look at the 1920 column governor's budget, that is what we are proposing for the upcoming fiscal year. As you're familiar with, Governor Newsom released his budget on January 10th. That amount is included in his governor's proposed budget, which is currently being reviewed by the legislature. One thing to report, which is great news, is that the board received approval for a budget change proposal to be included in the governor's proposed budget for 4 positions, most notably a assistant executive officer to help Jason with the day in, day out operations for the board. So really good stuff.
And Robert, if I might, it's kind of an interesting point. Those budget change proposals are being discussed right now, well, and also tomorrow in hearing with the Department of Finance and the Budget Committee. And this is one of those points where I kind of alluded to the EO can't be in two places at one time, right? So you guys know I'll be here tomorrow. I'm required to be with you. But there was a possibility that I might have to be leaving for the afternoon to go speak on behalf of those BCPs in front of the Budget Committee. And I'm happy to say that they don't find it necessary to ask us any questions, so I'm not required to be there tomorrow, which is a good thing. So
It's a great indicator.
But if I was, an AEO would come in really handy.
Yes.
Very good point.
I appreciate the irony in
Yeah.
that the discussion is
It's
about
like-
the AEO.
It's
right.
a flip thing. It's interesting.
Yeah. And also, I just want to take this as an opportunity to commend board staff. I mean, really in the fall process to get those BCPs in the governor's budget is very rigorous, a lot of tight time frames, and board staff have been really receptive and flexible in terms of our deadlines and really helpful. So just wanted to take a moment to commend Carl, Jason, and the rest of the gang over at the PTBC.
And just one on top of that, flexible meaning we need a month's worth of research done by 5 o'clock close of business tomorrow.
Wow.
So
At
I mean,
times.
at times.
At times, yeah.
It's always a crazy time of year when we're working with our BCPs, but I also want to thank you guys because Sarah Hinkle, our budget analyst, worked tirelessly to help us get those through, and she did a great job too.
Absolutely. Definitely a team effort when it comes to those things.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, you're welcome. No, it was a pleasure to working with them. They were very helpful, timely, and so it made my job a lot easy.
So with that said, that's good news to report. So that increase between your current budget as well as in comparison to the 1920 budget, the majority of it is those new BCPs that we're proposing in the 1920 budget, as well as just general salary increases that we talked about in the past to account for the annual salary increases for staff or retirement rate adjustments that happen each year. So that in combination with the BCPs really qualifies that increase in your budget for the 1920 fiscal year. The second update I have for you is regarding Fiscal. If you look at this fund condition, if you look at 2017-18, typically that should report actual figures for that fiscal year since we're in the 2018-19 current year. As you're aware of, as my last presentation to the board, we are having those transitional challenges, and that is not actual yet. We're still working on closing the 17-18 fiscal year. Our accounting office is working feverishly and really trying to get that year closed. However, we may have a new update for boards and bureaus here shortly to provide a possible new time frame to when we feel that 17-18 will be closed. However, in the meantime, just wanted to reiterate that we are working with board staff to provide expenditure projections monthly. One thing to counteract some of that uncertainty is that Sarah would have to go into the system manually and extract that information out for the board to provide more context or just more of a pulse for Jason as well as our office to see how the board is spending their money. So even though we don't have those reports, we still have access to the information in the system, which we just pull out manually. And we provide those expenditure projections to board staff so they could take a look at them as well. So we could reconcile every month to ensure that we are tracking the spend within our budget. So that's an update for Fiscal. The third update I have for you all today is the current year and the move. So as you're aware that board staff will be moving probably next fiscal year, it looks like, or possibly this fiscal year. We do have money set aside in the ARF. We're tracking to save roughly about $75,000 this year. But, you know, just to plan for some of the uncertainty of that, we may be talking to Jason to see, you know, depending on when that move will occur, we may move more monies into what we call an architectural revolving fund to set aside money for that effort to ensure that we do have money to make that move happen. So just an update there. The move is still happening. We're still planning for that.
So that's not reflected, though, on this, right?
No.
Okay.
We do have monies in the ARF. If we need more monies, we would have to set aside current year authority to put more of that money aside. But again, it's not it is reflected in terms of that dollar figure to where that $4.7 million you see in the 18-19 fiscal year, we would have to set some of that aside to put into that account. But there's no new monies coming in the new fiscal year to account for any of the move at this point in this fund condition that we're presenting today. So with that said, that concludes my update for the board's budget, the upcoming fiscal year's budget, as well as the move. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the board's fund condition.
Robert, you had, in your presentation, talked about the floor and the ceiling for months in reserve. That rule of thumb being anything under than 3. And when you said if the board's fund condition does fall underneath that 3, there are some steps that you can take. Can you kind of elaborate on what those steps are?
Sure. So some of the steps that we would have to explore are, one, increasing fees to a reasonable amount to ensure the long-term sustainability of the fund. And usually how you go about that is either through regulations, if you have room within your statutory authority, or you would have to propose a statutory fee increase if you're already at your ceiling. And really how you go about that, especially when you have to go in front of the legislature to propose a new fee ceiling, you would have to conduct a fee audit to really see how that workload, the costs are really falling in terms of what license is paying for what. And once we have that study done, we take that and we would approach the legislature to say, hey, we need to increase our fees accordingly. And that's usually the vehicle we would use to propose or justify that fee increase. And the second option there is, if fees aren't really the problem, then we would have to take a look at our spending. So if we don't want to increase our fees, we possibly need to take a look at how we're spending our money and possibly reduce our spending if need be, if that's the case, to ensure the long-term sustainability of the fund. So really those are the two general options that how we would approach if a fund is approaching insolvency, is really taking a look at what you collect in revenue and what you spend each fiscal year.
So the first option, though, it does have to go through the legislative process.
In regards to the statutory fee increase to where you need to change your fee in law?
Yeah.
Correct.
In law.
Yeah.
Okay.
The regulations meaning that if you do still have room to where in law it states that you could charge up to a certain amount, let's say hypothetically $250 for a renewal fee, and you're only assessing, say, $100, you could go through the regulatory process to increase anywhere between that range, to where it doesn't have to necessarily go in front of the legislature, but it would have to go through the regulatory process.
And members might remember, prior to our last fee increase, the fund condition was sub 3 months, right? Like 3 weeks at times. So, but as a result of that fee increase, the fund itself has grown pretty well over time. Now we're getting into what I would consider to be kind of my comfort level as far as being able to sleep at night and knowing, things looming on the horizon. I'd like a double-digit fund ideally, and I think we'll get there at some point. To address kind of the question about the concern with the monies for the move, right? So we've tried to plan for a rainy day, and we've taken some of our costs and cost savings that we've realized over time and put them in that ARF, about $200,000 a year over the last 2 years. To set that money aside for the cost of the move. The move is going to be quite a bit more than that, but not more than what I believe that the fund condition can sustain and still remain healthy. And then even after the move, the fund continued to grow at that point. So I don't believe that a fee increase is in our kind of near future by any means. And then having said that, if it was, we are at our statutory caps now. Right? So there is no promulgation of regulation to increase a fee. We will be forced to go before the legislature to ask for that.
Jason, I have a question. Sorry, Dr. Drummer. You mentioned, Robert, that we'd have to go through a fee audit process. Can we begin that process before we actually need to go the statutory level and actually increase that? Can we just have that data ready so should we need it, it's already available to us to use?
Yeah, absolutely. You could go through the fee audit anytime you want in terms of just getting that understanding of how your costs are being spent in terms of the different license type. Just to note, depending on when that fee audit occurs, as you know, costs are increased, the industry changes. So depending on when the board feels is appropriate to go in front of the legislature, just one thing to suggest, hopefully whenever that fee audit occurs is within that recent time period. Because if it's, say, 5-6 years ago, then,
Data's stale.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So
Thank you.
I have a question just to refresh my memory to make sure it's accurate at the moment. I believe we requested a regulatory increase in our ceiling when we went through our sunset process.
That's correct.
Because we had reached regulatory maximum.
That's correct.
We had reached our ceiling, and we requested an increase, but it did not get approved.
Yeah, as part of our last sunset review process, one of the recommendations that the board made to the legislature was to consider increasing the caps because we were at ceiling. Not by any means recommending another fee increase of any kind, but just that, for lack of a better analogy, while we had the hood of the car open, let's take a look at something that's opportune. And no, we did not receive a new authority for that. But moving forward, should we come across unforeseen circumstances that create excessive costs or something like that, we would have to go before the legislature, possibly through emergency legislation, to address that. But that's worst case scenario kind of stuff. Right now, the fund is healthy. It's growing at what I would consider, a positive rate in the sense that I don't like 3-month fund conditions. They, make me nervous. I also don't like not having room in my statutory caps either. But I don't have a choice for that right now. So,
Jason, I had a quick question. So I think I heard you correctly. You looked into the Kaiser crystal ball and said that you foresee double digits in the reserve at some point. And my question would be, is that statement based on the current statutory cap that we're at, or in anticipation of getting authority to increase that?
So right now we're projected next fiscal year to hit 7-8 month area. As soon as that move occurs, that's going to take a good chunk of change out of the fund condition and set us back a couple months. But the structure of the board itself will not have changed significantly enough to impact revenue versus expenditure at that point. And so I'd still see us kind of taking that initial hit and then having it climb again. Obviously, it's going to set me back over my 5-year, 10-year plan kind of thing, but we'll have a move under our belt at that point, so I'll be satisfied with that.
Until we're asked to move again.
Right.
Until we're asked to move again, or again, part of the double-digit idea in the fund condition is to account for the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. There are circumstances that can really be impactful on boards of our size when it comes to lawsuit or changing contracts or those kind of things. So I'd like to be able to create as much of a cushion as possible so that insolvency or something like that doesn't become a real threat for us.
Hear. Any other questions or concerns?
Yeah, since we talked about all the one side of it, I want to look at this. I have a question on the spending side of it, because you mentioned the other way of addressing this issue is to reduce the spending. General question: what are typically the items or categories where boards our size blow it?
Right.
No, that's blatant,
Right. I would say boards, I would say programs in general, maybe just state entities in general, personnel costs would probably more, if not be the heaviest contributor to your budget. So, I mean, in the event that we have to take a look at your spending, I mean, that's pretty much one of the biggest areas that we would have to look at is really the workforce, because that's a lot of where your budget's going. Other things, depending on the board and kind of how they spend their money, really situational, but, there are general O&E or operating expense line items that we take a look at. For example, if you are contracting for a project or for a consultant, that is an annual thing, I mean, we could also take a look at those one-offs as well. But I would say something that's consistent is probably personnel costs, unfortunately. I would say enforcement, but again, that is something that is outside of the board's control. It's really kind of how the Attorney General prosecutes their cases, or really how the complaints are coming in on an annual basis. So hopefully that answers your question, TJ. Is really
that answers it perfectly, because you actually covered it when you were talking in the 5.2 approved by and that these 4 positions were already accounted for.
Right.
So you're lining up. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Great. Any other comments or questions from the board? And any public comment at all? And anything to add, Carl?
As far as the spending goes, it's going to be part of what I'm going to be talking about, so I can wait for that.
Okay. All right.
The only thing that just as a highlight, and that is, again, to bring kind of that attention to the fiscal issue, not having the certainty of reconciled accounting, it creates issues when it comes to projections. So some of the things that we might find in the future is the projections that you see in front of you now are based on like straight line projections over past expenditures and past revenues taken in. And they don't account for fluctuations. They don't account for things that we've already as staff incorporated as saving measures, cutting costs here or there. Those aren't reflected here. And I like that because it's a very conservative way to say, regardless, if you did what you were doing, you're going to be at 7.6 in the next fiscal year. There are things that we are doing that aren't accounted here that you can't see because of that fiscal discrepancy. But so 7.6, and I kind of stumbled in my speech earlier where I said we're around the 8-month projection, and that's because internally that's where we think we are based on our own numbers. But just kind of keep that in mind. Fiscal and the software that's being implemented statewide comes with the same difficulties that you would be familiar with any kind of software change, whether it be going from legacy system to Breeze and making the data fit and some of those kind of growing pains. Fiscal has those same issues.
But this is a long growing pain.
It's a lot of departments. It's a very large project.
Yeah, every state department is affected by the new transition to the new accounting system.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you said you were looking at 17, 18 and closing that out now?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you for your report.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Looking forward to the next board meeting here in SAC. I'll be here again to report again.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thanks again, Sarah.
Yes, thank you.
And we could stay for Carl's presentation, so if there's any questions on the spending, then we could help assist answer those questions as well.
Want to go into that now?
Yeah, agenda item 13.
Agenda item 13. So let's go into 13A, budget report.
Okay, don't think I introduced myself for the record, but I'm Carl Nelson. I'm the Fiscal and Business Services Liaison for the board. And just a couple of remarks, really. I did have to make one correction to my briefing paper, which shows the budget as being $4,669,000. That's an error. It's actually $4,715,000, which is reflected on the expenditure report. So the expenditure report's correct, and the briefing paper was wrong. Another comment would be on our expenditures. If you look at the expenditure report, it will pretty much reflect 50% or lower spending through 2 quarters, and some places much less than that. Enforcements were quite a bit lower than that in a couple of areas, and some are as low as 27%. So it's very difficult for us, I think, to find really rich areas to be cutting spending at this point. but that's just really where we want to be as far as Q2.
I think Carl's trying to point out we've already tightened the purse strings about as tight as we could possibly make it on him. There's no place to cut anything else.
That's right. And then as far as revenue goes, it is up during our Q2. It shows an increase from last year's Q2 totals. And our revenue totals were obtained by utilizing PTBC cashiering Breeze statistical reports, whereas our expenditures are provided to you through the projection reports that Budget Office does. So those are my comments. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, Carl, you mentioned that all the line items decrease, the most significant being the Department of Investigations. From the previous year, 757, that's like half. What did that attribute to? Did we suddenly...
No, the Department of Investigations operates on a different budget preparation. It's called the 2-year roll forward. Okay. And the way it works is the state budget is building, we're building our state budget 2 years ahead of time. So all we have to go by really at that point, 2 years previous, is the known DFI expenditures. So let's say we're building for 2018-19. Back in 2016-17, we would already know what the expenditures were for DFI from previous year.
That's right.
And that's basically how we base this budget. We'll take that item, we'll look at any kind of work credits or anything that we also know about, and then we'll take that amount and roll forward 2 years to create the new budget. So really, DFI is collecting on expenditures that are 2 years old.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean that really shows. I mean, the DFI budget is based on activity 2 years prior to the fiscal year you're looking at. So if you're trying to compare it to the previous fiscal year, then that's on a separate track. So just keep that in mind in comparison fiscal years. It's always 2 years before what you're looking at.
It's probably the most unusual methodology that we have on this display, but it's best suited for that service. It's a direct invoice for service provided, projected from data that was 2 years ago. Moving forward, that number is significantly lower now because of things that we did 2 years ago, but ongoing, and we've discussed this in the past, I actually think I'm due a credit here pretty soon where you'll actually see an inversion because of that 2 year data difference where you allocated so many monies for it, but because it's based on 2-year-old data, there's going to be a discrepancy between the two numbers.
Right.
Any other board comment or question? I do have a comment or a question, and I'm afraid to ask it because it says here on the expenditure statistics report, like the fourth item down, that board members have spent 216% of what they were budgeted for.
Yes,
So
you have.
What are we doing?
Shame on, no. So there's a few things to consider there. While that allocation arguably is fairly low, it's something that we would adjust over time. So as we experience more travel for members, more per diem claims for members, higher level of case review, those kind of things, we would adjust that over time, and we haven't had an opportunity to do that yet.
Okay. So we're behaving.
If you weren't, you would know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Robert, is there a way that we can take a look at that and see if there's some way of getting some more money into that line item? So
7A.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few options there. If it's just more of a realignment of how the board is spending their money, then we could do just as what we call a net zero budget realignment, to where we could just move dollars around your current budget to have it represent how the board is spending their money. Another option is if it's something that is being historically overspent and the board needs additional authority there, then we would have to go through the budget process and request more authority for that. But knowing it's just board member expenditures, it seems like, that's something that will be fixed via current realignment of the budget. So it would just be an official action in the fall process to just realign your budget officially to really represent what you're spending on that line item.
And while we might have exceeded that particular line item, you'll see those monies are available because of savings in other line items, right? We haven't even come close to expending some of the line items potential, and so it's just a matter of shifting it. And we could adjust it, and we may, but we'll be monitoring that closely so that if we do adjust it, we adjust it appropriately.
That's right.
So we don't want you guys to get too out of hand. Right.
Thank you, Carl. Any further board comment? Any public comment? Okay, thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
And so agenda item 13B, outreach.
Excuse me. Hello, I'm April Beauchamp. I'm the Communication Education Analyst. So for outreach, the website traffic for quarter 2 was 188,071. So there was an 8% decrease over the last year's quarter 2. The About Us tab traffic increased 19%. The Home tab decreased 10%. The Consumer tab decreased 9%. The Licensee tab decreased 6%. And then the Applications tab decreased 9%. Publications increased by 221%. The Forms tab decreased by 18%, and then the Laws tab decreased by 24%. So the publications and the About Us, they have been steadily increasing, and I think a lot of that is due to the outreach efforts at the school presentations. We have QR codes that have the little QR thing on the back where students can just take a picture of it on their phone and it pulls up the publications for them. So that's helped a lot. And then as far as the forms, licensees, and applications decreasing, that's also due to outreach efforts in our attempt to go green. So we are pushing people more towards Breeze and applying online. And so the statistics in that rising tells us why it's decreasing on the website. They're no longer downloading the forms for like the renewal or to apply and sending them in. They're more so going onto the Breeze website to do so. And then Facebook, we had 33,914 people access our page. The traffic increased 84% compared to last fiscal year. In the post, there were 12 quarter 2 last fiscal year. This year, we had 63, so the posts increased by 425%. Likes increased by 25%. Engaged users increased by 514%. Reached users increased by 66%. Consumers increased by 587%, and then talked about increased by 429%. So we're all positive in Facebook. Other outreach things, we went to Sac State on October 1st, 8th, and the 15th, and then again November 27th. We've also visited other schools since then. In our newsletter that's going to be coming out in spring, we started the PT Spotlight. This is where we recognize a physical therapist who gives back to their community. So in this newsletter, it's Eric Nielsen. He works with a nonprofit organization called Skate MD, where they help kids with disabilities learn how to skate and just give them something they normally wouldn't be able to do on their own. So other skateboarders come out and they volunteer. So we are doing an article on that, and that'll be in the newsletter. And then also we have videos now on Facebook. So we had a Sac State one where Sac State students talked about how they felt about the board coming out and giving a presentation on the application process. UOP also did one. And then we have the Skate MD video out there also, which kind of shows what it's about and what he does. For upcoming outreach, Jason mentioned we are doing the licensing fair at West Hills College in Lemoore. We also have school presentations coming up at Northridge and Casa Loma College in Southern California, and we're also going to be attending the student conclave at UOP this year as well. Any questions on outreach?
Thank you very much for that. I would actually like to see if you could amend the report so that it includes all of those additional things that you talked about outreach, the things that aren't included in the written report that we have right now, so that all can be recorded. So I think that that's all very valuable information.
Okay.
I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
April.
Thank you.
And I know we've talked about this before, but I'm going to ask it again. When you tease out on the website activity, you know, the different areas, how do we know that that it was a consumer? Oh, that's the tab that they went to. That's
the
what
tab.
it is. That's the tab. Okay. So that's a little bit down.
But again, even the consumer tab and the visits to the consumer tab, you can attribute some of that decrease in outreach and having consumers go directly to Breeze because they're filing either a license verification or a complaint through the Breeze system. So,
How about laws? Why do we think that's gone down a little?
ideally, I would think it's the QR code that we've provided to the students, so they're accessing that PDF directly as opposed to the statistic collecting who's come to the splash page for laws.
Yes,
So
that makes
they're getting
sense.
that more concentrated document that we've provided directly. So they're not really kind of coming through the front door.
Yes.
They're going straight to the material.
And students probably like that.
Apparently. I mean, I think that seeing that decrease there kind of speaks to that. And then just to touch on about the stealing of thunder for staff is that, and April she probably won't because she's modest, but this ticks off some of those goals in the outreach action plan when it came to the creation of videos, documentation and those kind of things, and the number of schools visited. So yesterday, April made me aware of that we are, as a group, supposed to visit every school in California by the completion of the strategic plan. So just so you guys know.
Oh, good job.
And she said it will be done.
It will be done.
I like that.
So let us know.
So on the Facebook activity, again, talked about consumers reached, engaged. What does consumers mean?
So this is just the number of people who click on any of our content. So whether they're clicking on it through seeing someone else repost it, so they're not necessarily like on our page as far as they don't necessarily follow us, but they're seeing it through other people they maybe do follow.
Okay, that makes sense.
And those are analytics provided directly from the Facebook analytics page. So it's whether or not how they discern what is a consumer or what is not a consumer is based on their algorithm. We're just using it as a measuring stone.
And 60-something posts, you said?
Yes, so this year, quarter two, we had 63 posts on Facebook. And then last year, quarter two, there was only 12 between October and December. So
Fantastic. And I think I did see the skating video maybe like a day or two when it came out, and at that point there were a couple of likes, but there were already 14 shares. So the shares were more than the likes, and so that was
a good thing.
Yeah, it was really nice to see. So, yeah, good job on that.
thank you.
And any comments from board members about highlighting licensees providing services, on their own time to consumers of California?
A thought that I've that is in my head is about whether the PTs or PTAs are in the process of providing therapy, or is it just additional community outreach kind of things that are not necessarily physical therapy with what they're doing? Because I know that there are lots of PTs who provide pro bono work in homeless shelters in disadvantaged communities and that kind of thing. So it's an area of focus that I'm wondering about.
No, I think that's a great idea. I don't think that initially pursuing this idea that we had an idea of excluding something like that. I think that's definitely something worthy and meritorious that we would want to consider. So whether it's within the scope and their contribution, or just a community service kind of, I think both would be up for consideration. And having said that, we're always looking for those kind of ideas. So if there are people that you think are, again, worthy of that kind of recognition, please let us know.
Right. So I think initially we just kind of did a word of mouth to get some names out there for you, but what sorts of plans might you have in the future for getting nominations for highlighting someone?
When the newsletter goes out, there is underneath the article, if you know anyone, please contact us, send us nominations, kind of. And then there will also be, when the newsletter comes out and it's posted on social media, it'll also say the same thing. Okay. So we're going to work all of our different platforms to try to get as many nominations in as possible, because eventually we would even like to do like Facebook posts once a month or something. So maybe it won't make it in the newsletter, but we would still like to recognize those PTs and PTAs that way.
Right. And when's the newsletter coming out?
It should be out around sometime in May is when it should be out. So they're working on it now.
Great. Any further board discussion or question, comment? Any public comment on outreach? Thanks so much, April.
Thank you.
And thank you for stepping in and helping to cover additional things when the board staff seems to be a little bit short.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, agenda item number 11, ledge report.
Okay, so as noted in the briefing paper and also on the legislative calendar, the legislature reconvened on January 7th, and February 22nd was the last day for bills to be introduced. May 31st is the last day for bills to be passed out of the House of Origin. October 13th is the last day for the governor to sign or veto bills, and all statutes will take effect January 1st, 2020. I'll go ahead and direct members to the legislative summary and provide a brief update on all of the bills that are listed there. And a quick note, as Ms. Defoe touched upon earlier, it is very early in the session, so many of these bills are being assigned or referred to committees and are spot bills at this time. The first and second bill on the legislative analysis, AB 5 and AB 71, are the result of the Dynamex versus Superior Court of Los Angeles decision, where the court adopted a new test for determining whether an individual is an employee or an independent contractor. This new legal standard, known as the ABC test, would make it more difficult for businesses to utilize independent contractors. So AB 5, worker status independent contractors, which is sponsored by the California Labor Federation, it is a spot bill for now. However, it is intended to codify the Dynamex decision and make it applicable and put it into state law. This bill currently is pending referral in the Assembly. AB 71, Employment Standards, Independent Contractors and Employees, represents a counter-response to the Dynamex decision and essentially proposes to revert to the previous multi-factor Borrello test for determining employee or independent contractor status. And this bill was re-referred to the Assembly Committee on Labor and Employment on February 26th. So we'll be seeing a lot of amendments coming up on those two bills. AB 193 was amended actually yesterday. in the Assembly BMP Committee and would require DCA beginning January 1st, 2020, to conduct a comprehensive review of all licensing requirements and identify unnecessary licensing requirements as defined in the bill. The bill beginning February 1st, 2021, and every 2 years thereafter would require each board to submit to the department an assessment on the board's progress in implementing policies to facilitate licensure portability for active duty service members, veterans, and military spouses. It would also require that DCA report to the legislature on March 1st, 2023, and every 2 years thereafter on their progress and issue a final report to the legislature. So that has changed a little bit. We'll be seeing, I'm sure, some more amendments to come.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So are those things that you just identified items that we would discuss or they would ask for in a sunset bill?
As far as the DCA obligation for reporting?
That and like what the requirement would be for reporting on military spouses and that sort of thing.
It could be, but this is a separate requirement that would be the responsibility of DCA to collect that data and provide a completely separate report to the legislature. It may just happen to be data that we also discussed during sunset, but DCA would have to figure out a way to compile that data through the existing systems, either Legacy or Breeze, to be able to provide that report and answer to this committee those concerns. It's something we see regularly through the legislative session, right? So the first one being identify any kind of barriers, to licensure. I think we're used now to seeing that being introductory language to a bill. It has not been successful in the past, but there is also some other elements of this that are very common when it comes to take a look at all of your regulatory language to determine its necessity, that kind of second assessment as far as whether are they just regulations that have been around for a really long time and haven't been amended, and do they need to be amended? And we've seen that language from one legislative session to another. But as far as the data is collected, DCA would have to provide that as a separate report. So even if it wasn't related to sunset, we would still, if this bill passed, be obligated to provide that data to the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and AB 496, Business and Professions. This bill would replace gendered terms and non-gendered terms and make various other non-substantive changes to the Business and Professions Code. It would define licensee to mean any person authorized by a license, certificate, registration, or other means to engage in a business or profession as specified, and would provide that any reference to licentiate be deemed to refer to licensee. This bill was referred to the Assembly Business and Professions Committee on February 21st. AB 613, Professions and Vocations regulatory fees would authorize each board within the department to increase every 4 years any fee authorized by the board by an amount not to exceed the California Consumer Price Index for the preceding 4 years. It would also require the director of DCA to approve any fee increase proposed by the board, except for specific circumstances as defined in the bill. And on February 25th, this bill was referred to the Assembly Business and Professions Committee.
So would this then take precedent over our current process for increasing fees, that we would no longer have our current ceiling, and that we would be limited to every 4 years to be able to increase fees?
So that's part of the discussion right now as far as the way people are interpreting the language in this bill. There's nothing in the language itself that says those other vehicles would be gone. This would just be an addition to. I kind of like the idea in the sense that it accounts for things like inflation and increasing cost over time, where that doesn't often get addressed in a regulatory package in assessing fees. So for just simple accounting sake, I like the language. But again, the discussion is, does that mean this is the one and only avenue to increase fees? This is how it's going to be done? Does this eliminate in any way the normal promulgatory way of doing your fee increases? I don't think so. But that question has been raised, and I'm sure that because of it being raised, they'll have to address it in that language, or at least in the analysis for it.
Okay, and AB 1592, athletic trainers. This would enact legislation relating to the licensure and regulation of athletic trainers. It'll probably be, we're anticipating it to be similar to the bill that we saw last session. On February 25th, this bill was read for the first time, so we'll keep an eye on that one. SB 53, open meetings, would require for two-member advisory committee to hold an open and public meeting if at least one of the members of the advisory committee is a member of the main board and the board is at least partially funded by the state. This bill would declare that it is to take effect as an urgency statute, and on March 12th, this bill was re-referred to the Senate Appropriations Committee.
And that's for 3 or more individuals.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to emphasize how this would change the board's way the board currently does things. So, for example, the board has the committee that is discussing the exempt level status of the executive officer, the organizational structure of the board, and the committee operates with 2 people. And therefore, because it's fewer than 3 individuals, those 2 people don't have to notice a 10-day public hearing when they meet or meet with other individuals, like the liaison for agency or DCA, as you mentioned, you may have done. What this bill would do is require that such committees of 2 individuals would have to comply with the Open Meetings Act, and so you'd no longer be able to do that. Right now,
2 individuals?
Yeah, so right now, the Open Meetings Act states that it's 3 or more people, if they're board members, then they would have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. This bill would bring it down to 2. So essentially eliminating the exemption for complying with the Open Meetings Act. I think one program has already taken an opposition to this bill. Let me see if I can find it. And maybe, and if Brooke or Jason know off the know which one that might be. I think it might have been optometry. But I did want to emphasize this one for your discussion or consideration.
Well, I think the spirit of the bill is to increase transparency. I feel as though it is going to eliminate the ability for committees to be nimble and to move forward on things in between board meetings. It kind of defeats the purpose of having a committee at that point. You might as well just have the full board work on everything and just have more frequent meetings. So that would be my concern, is that it will slow down some of the board's other projects or initiatives that might be cost prohibitive to do with the full board in a full board meeting with travel and all the other things that are taken into consideration for that. So just my opinion.
And correction, I apologize, it wasn't optometry, it was accountancy. And there were previous iterations to this bill making a similar requirement that has been opposed by other programs. I think one consideration that may be brought up or is brought up in this bill as an opposing consideration is the difficulty that would be created for board members to meet with people like liaisons or have meetings with other individuals without turning it into a public meeting.
I'm not seeing where it says 2. I'm missing that. Brooke, is it 2 or 3?
Under the bill language in government code, it says 3 or more. Under it's government code 11121, subsection C.
I'll pull up the bill text.
It's the accept language, Sawa?
Is it subsection D? Is that where?
State body includes an advisory board, advisory committee, advisory commission, subcommittee, so on and so forth, of a body that consists of 3 or more individuals as prescribed, except...
May have been changed. I'm looking at the Legislative Council's digest, and it's indicating 3. But I believed that this
well, so after
had to
3,
do with a
there's
change to 2.
There's a language, and it goes on further to state, except a board, commission, committee, or similar multi-member body on which a member of the body serves in their official capacity as a representative of that state body, and that is supported in whole or part. So essentially, anything that a board member of this committee serves on, and multi-member body, not specifying 3, so 2. If there was a committee, as far as exact, one of you in your capacity is serving as a representative of the state and is funded by, this language would include that. And this sounds correct. This has been, it's similar to language that we've seen in previous legislative sessions 2 or 3 times. And it is something that would create some difficulty for any member of this board to, as Sawa alluded to, the example was perfect with, Kat and TJ. If they were wanting to sit down and have a conversation with somebody from BSEH, we'd have to make sure that they did it separate from each other. Because there were 2 of them, they now might be, under this definition, considered a multi-member body.
But if both of them wanted to sit down with agency or DCA, then that would have to be noticed.
Correct. Which, that creates some difficulty in logistics and trying to plan those kind of things out and increase costs as well.
And I think what's previously occurred is that I think Governor Brown had considered it, and then he rejected it or vetoed on the basis that the Open Meetings Act was sufficient because the exemption only applies to advisory committees, meaning that the committee can't make any decisions on its own. If the 2-member body was delegated authority to make decisions, then even though it's 2 members, it would still have to meet by open meeting. But I believe what Governor Brown determined is that since it was an advisory body, they'd have to come back to report during an open meeting to the rest of the board anyway, that the law was sufficient the way it was. And then I believe it came back to Brown a second time, and then he vetoed it again, basically reiterating or emphasizing his previous grounds. So this is another, I think, iteration, essentially for, Governor Newsom's desk. So, and you're right, it is it's not a blatant, this applies to, 2-member bodies. It's more, any body that is funded by an agency, but then that's the effect it would have. So.
Well, and not just any body, but any member. So that any member who acts on their official capacity as a representative of that state body. And I guess my challenge is somebody acting as a representative of the body when they're preparing information for the body, that they're not acting on behalf of the body, So the committee is not acting on behalf of the board, but is collecting information to present to the board for the board to take action.
As a
And
single
so-
person.
Yeah.
Well, the
As
way
an individual, or, I mean, because this essentially precludes any of us from doing anything without noticing the public that I am going to talk to somebody about their experiences so that I can bring something to the board.
I wouldn't go so far as to read it that way, and the reason for that is that it says except a board, commission, committee, or similar multi-member body. So from that, you know, it appears that it would only apply to 2 or more people, not just one person. And I think, like you said, if it did apply to one person, that would essentially halt the board's ability to prepare for its own meetings. And I don't think that that was the intent of this language. The way we're currently reading it is it applies to 2 or more.
And if the board president wanted to reach out to any other board member, I mean, would that also fall under this, or it would have to be a named committee?
I believe that would be a one-on-one conversation
Yeah.
that you wouldn't necessarily be representing in a similar or like multi-member body.
Okay.
But it's a good question.
Yeah, if the board members in having that conversation weren't delegated authority to have a conversation such as in a committee, then I don't think that this applies. What you would want to be concerned about, though, is violating the Open Meetings Act in the sense of having serial communications, or hub and
Right.
spoke communications, all that kind of stuff
Yeah.
would apply. But this is more like an official 2+ member body, you know, because I think this is intended to really address that exemption in the Open Meetings Act. And it's essentially saying, I think the purpose of this bill is to say that that exemption is a loophole. You know, we shouldn't have committees of 2 or more that don't have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. Let's close that door. And I think that's really what it's intended to deal with.
I believe, this is my personal perspective, that this legislation, or then the idea of this, was generated out of particular legislative action where committee members acted on their own on behalf of the boards. That I'm not sure that they were given authority, but they took authority to make decisions. Individual or 1 or 2 member committees took their authority and made decisions on behalf of the board for major projects within the state. And that this is intended to try to address that to be able to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
You know, I've always advised that to the extent a board can discuss, research, whatever the work might be, do it all together as a group, the better it be, right? Do it that way. Splitting up into a number of different committees, even if that committee doesn't take a particular authoritative action in making a decision, it still filters the information that might come before the board in its whole at some point. And I think that there's some potential for bad optics with that, which is a direct result of this bill language, that sometimes those committees, or maybe too many committees, being split up and divvied up amongst board members, should have been done by the board in its entirety. And so I always advise, you know, in those circumstances, I would prefer you as a group to, you know, to work and follow the APA and do it in a public and noticed way and that kind of thing. Splitting up into committees can create more issues than problems it solves.
Do any board members feel strongly that we need to take any other position other than no position?
is this now?
It is in the, I think it's in the Senate Appropriations Committee. And it went there on the 12th of March.
Is this substantially different at this point from the bill that was vetoed last year?
Not at
No?
this time.
No.
Mm-mm.
Very similar.
Any thoughts, Dr. Drummer? Any other board members, any thoughts? Mr. Kaiser, any thoughts?
Only that as this bill progresses through the process, you will have, as a group, an opportunity at the June meeting to see if that language has changed significantly, and if the board, deems a position at that time, we'll issue that board's opposition or support or what have you, whatever position that might be, to the author and to the committee in which it resides.
Okay, thank you.
Refresh my memory. Did we take a position last year?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, SB 425, Health Practitioners Licensees File Probationary Physicians and Surgeons Certificate and Professional Conduct. This bill would give hospitals, clinics, and other health facilities 15 days from the time they receive an allegation of patient sexual abuse or sexual misconduct involving medical professionals who work on their premises to report the allegation to the appropriate state licensing board. In addition, these provisions would apply to allegations involving the individuals licensed by the state's Physical Therapy Board, among other DCA boards. Each incident of failing to report, as SB 425 requires, would be subject to a civil fine as much as $50,000. The fine would increase to $100,000 for each willful failure to report. SB 425 also seeks to stem attempts by physicians and surgeons to prolong medical board investigations into allegations by failing to show up for the interview without good cause. Doing so would be deemed an instance of unprofessional misconduct for which the board would take action upon. Also, this bill gives the medical board the authority to suspend physicians and surgeons from practice while an investigation of patient sexual abuse or sexual misconduct is pending if the board determines that doing so prevents health and safety risks to the public. And in addition, this bill requires that if physicians or surgeons have been issued probationary licenses in California, either because they have transferred from another state or are newly minted doctors with disciplinary actions on their record that require transparency but do not preclude them from practicing, the record relating to that probationary license must remain publicly posted online in the medical board's website for 10 years. And on March 7th, this bill was referred to the Senate Business, Professions, and Economic Development Committee. And SB 537, Workers' Compensation Independent Bill Review, is currently a spot bill, as noted in the Legislative Digest, and would make technical non-substantive changes to the provision authorizing a provider request an independent bill review. And on March 7th, this bill was referred to the Senate Rules Committee.
Ms. Defoe, do you have anything else to add?
I do. Stacy Defoe from CPTA, Executive Director. This is a bill that CPTA is sponsoring this year, and we're hoping to provide some regulation on third-party administrators in California under the workers' comp system. As it stands right now, they are wholly unregulated. In most cases, they're not even really acknowledged on their own in California as their own businesses. They sort of fall under the insurance companies, and so they're not subject to the same sort of regulations, rules as other companies. And we feel that for the benefit of the consumer in California, it would be a good idea to place some some regulations on them. So some of the things that are happening is that the third-party administrators will come in and they will deeply discount provider rates. In 2014, SB 893 was passed under the workers' comp system to make the rates fair enough in California to encourage quality providers to provide quality care to workers in California. At that time, a number of these third-party administrators have come in, and then they've worked to discount the rates off of those rates, and so then we're removing the encouragement for quality providers in California. So there's a few things that we're hoping to address. That's one of them. One of the things we like to see is we understand that third-party payers are probably going to be a course of business in California as our discounts off the fee schedule, but we'd like to see some kind of a floor at least on that fee schedule, and we're looking at Medicare rates as a fair floor for that. The other thing that's happening is when the third-party payers come in, they create very narrow networks, and they have all the control then over where the workers are referred to what providers downstream. And when even when physicians will get on to the MPNs, the medical provider networks, to find somebody to make a referral, all they will see is the name of that third-party administrator company. They won't actually see the name of a physical therapist. So the other thing we like to see addressed is some transparency in the NPNs where it's related to physical therapists, and make sure that the actual physical therapists are listed there so that they can be referred. The other thing we would like to see is that nobody besides the physical therapist, the provider, or the physician, the providers who are engaged in the provision of services, nobody but those professionals should be able to change the plan of care. And right now that's something that's not addressed. So we would like to make it clear in the law that only those professionals involved in the plan of care are able to change the plan of care, and then also to determine number of visits. There are already guidelines in place under workers' comp, the ACOM guidelines, and oftentimes the number of visits that are provided, the plan of care changes. All of those things are sort of arbitrary, and they're based on cost and not necessarily for the benefit of the patient. So that's the other thing we like to see addressed. So what you have in front of you is, like I said, it's a spot bill. We're looking at hopefully Monday for the language that I've outlined to be included in the bill. So maybe take a look again there and you'll see. And we are working very closely with the author, and who is Jerry Hill. He's chair, again, of the Labor Committee. He has great staff, and they have been very involved with us in the creation of this legislation that we think is more than fair and will go a long way toward making sure that care under workers' comp is accessible for California consumers. That's it. Are there any questions about this bill from us?
Are there any other sponsors?
Currently, we're the only sponsor, but we are working with a coalition of other healthcare providers who are similarly, I can't say that word right now, affected by this issue. So nobody's come on. Everybody's kind of waiting for the final language, but we anticipate that there will be other supporters coming on with us. Okay. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other comments on the ledge report from board members? And is there any public comment at all? Yes?
Thank
Thank you again. Briefly, David Campbell, California licensed PT, Oakland resident. I'm noticing of the, I think, 9 introduced bills that the position is no position. Is that just acknowledgement that we're early enough in the annual cycle that it's really too soon to take a position, or does a position emerge or a position evolve as the cycle wears on?
It could be a little bit of all of it, right? So it is very early in the session. Some of the bills are spot bills at this point, so there's no language to base a position off of. But from staff's perspective, some of the bills that are listed on this are things that the board members should be made aware of, informationally speaking, because they may affect us in some very indirect ways. And then some bills are very directly related to us, and you might see the board take positions either in the affirmative or in the negative at some point in the future.
And those are positions recommended by professional staff to the whole board. Could be.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Okay. It's 12:05. It's lunchtime. So how about we take a 1-hour recess and come back at 1:05 and finish with, or start up again with agenda item 12, rulemaking report.